Now, this next talk is highly relevant to the 2019 IT thing, containers. We're going to be talking about containers, talking about deploying containers, and hilariously, some container mistakes. Sarah, are some of these funny? Because I love a good funny container story.
They are. They're annoyingly non-specific because I'm not allowed to.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, there's that kind of annoying non-specific.
But, I got some bug bounty friends, and they love containers that were supposed to run for 10 minutes and have been running for weeks. They're always a source of good bounty cash. So yes, we have Sarah Young here, who is a security architect based in Melbourne. She works for Microsoft, and she's going to be talking all about containers. Take it away,
Yay!
Sarah. Woo!
Thank you. Oh, good. They've moved the camera because I was watching myself up there and it was really freaking me out. Anyway, hello. As you can see, if anyone wants to employ me as a graphic designer, as you can see, I've got like the skills, so feel free to come and ask me if you want to give me a job doing movie posters, because I'm amazing. I'm just going to say before I start, I'm actually quite sick, so if I sound terrible, or if I can't hear you if you ask questions, I'm really, really sorry. So I'm very drugged up and caffeinated up and everything, so I should be okay. Anyway, yes, hello. So, who am I? I stole this from another Microsoft employee. She's this line. She's a developer advocate called Tanya Janka. I do have her permission to steal this. I know she's been on Risky Biz. But they already gave the game away, and because it's not a big surprise with my T-shirt either. I work for this small software technology company. You might have heard of them. I don't know. Again, the problem, I should have told you, Pat, not to say who I work for, but because it ruins the slide. Anyway, yeah, I am a security architect. I'm based in Melbourne. I actually say that I pay rent in Melbourne because I'm never there, practically. After this, I'm going to Japan, which is cool, of course, but yeah, I don't spend a lot of time at home. I'm the best flatmate ever because I'm never there. But I pay half the rent. My job is helping customers move their stuff into the cloud securely and advising them how we can do that. Now also, I talk about how specifically Microsoft and Azure does that. I'm not doing that today, of course, because this would not be appropriate for a community event. I've worked in tech for the last decade or so. I am originally from the UK, which you can probably tell by the accent. I used to live in New Zealand for quite a long time. And then last year, I came to Australia. I overuse a lot of memes and GIFs or GIFs, whatever you want to call them. We're not going there. In my presentations, so yeah. This is actually my job title, which is Azure Cloud Security and Compliance Global Black Belt. And you think I'm joking, but I'm not. This is genuinely my job title. I didn't know it was my job title until I started at Microsoft, when everyone was referring to me as a GBB, and I had to ask someone what it meant, because I had no idea. You can basically replace that word global black belt with specialist, but at least, I can kind of tell people I fight hackers and stuff. I don't. I'm actually not an incident response or anything, but, it sounds pretty cool, right? I don't know. Yes, we'll go with it. Yes, it does. It kind of borderlines on kind of a little bit. We've talked about family-friendly words, and now I can't think of one. Arrogant. I was trying to think of a family-friendly word there. It borderlines on arrogant and cool. I don't have it on my business cards. I actually just have specialist, but officially that's my job title, so yeah. And in the similar vein to what our previous talk, I have a super common first and last name, and if you Google me, you will see other Sarah Youngs. My dad told me, and if it had been anyone apart from my dad who told me this, and this was only last week, he was like, do you know if you Google you come up on the first page now? And I was like, Dad, okay, kind of weird. Well, it's not weird because it's my dad, but if it had been anyone else, it would have been weird. But you also have Sarah Young, the Christian author. See, I found her book this was in CVS in Hawaii last year, but her book was like $30, so I wasn't going to buy it. And one that I can't put up a slide of is Sarah Young, the late 1980s porn star. It's a real thing, so Google that with caution, because it is a thing. I found it when I was 14 at school, so that doesn't say much for my school's filtering. We were all doing the putournameinCom and seeing what comes up. And yeah, no one got what I got, that was for sure. So there you go. So actually, the sarahyoung.com domain has actually gone up for sale recently, and I really want to buy it, but it's like $500. But yeah. So I think I probably wasted about 5 minutes just talking about random things. A lot of the time, I've done this talk when I was international, and usually I have some slides about how everything in Australia is trying to kill you, because people seem really obsessed with that overseas, but we're in Brisbane, so I don't need to... I cut those slides from this bit. So what am I going to talk about? So as you saw, my amazing movie poster, you don't need to know anything about that movie if you haven't seen it, by the way, for this talk. But if you don't know the premise of that movie, it's basically that Kate Hudson decides that she's a journalist, and she's going to make all the common mistakes that women make during dating. And we won't go there into how kind of vaguely stereotypical and possibly dodgy that kind of whole concept is. But and then she tries to see if she can drive Matthew McConaughey, I can't remember their names in the actual movie, she sees if she can get rid of him in 10 days. So I was thinking about containers and how they get owned a lot, or people don't do them particularly well. And I thought, hey, maybe I could do an experiment where I could see if I could get a container owned in 10 minutes. Now, when I submitted this talk to the CFP, I was still kind of in the middle of this experiment, and I had this great idea that I would spin up a container just before the talk, and we'd check it at the end, and we'd see that it had been totally owned. Now, I wasn't going to give out the details of it, because I realized if I give out the details of something at a hacker conference, clearly by the end of my talk it's going to be owned. That seemed like slightly unfair. Now, that didn't work amazingly well, but we'll come back to that. So that probably in itself isn't a presentation. That's probably about 10 minutes worth of ranting. So I'm going to talk about good security practices for containers, Kubernetes, and related tools. I'm also going to talk a lot about cloud migration. Like I said, I'm cloud agnostic today, which is cool. Ignore the back of my t-shirt. And we're going to talk about good security practices for containers, Kubernetes, and other related things. I'll talk about cloud because usually when someone is moving to the cloud and they're containerizing their apps at the same time, they often go hand in hand. I have seen one whole business that decided they would containerize on-prem. I don't really know why you'd bother, but I accept that is a thing, possibly. So I split this into a couple of bits, which is protecting your data, caring for your OS and orchestrators, checking privilege, shifting left with containers, and getting my containers pwned. I do add, as I said before, a lot of GIFs and random pictures in. If I can't find anything suitable, I just default to cat. So, I like it. It's a cat in a container, come on. If I fits, I sits, Yeah. Anyway, so this pretty much sums up container and Kubernetes security for me. It's not monkey emoji specifically, it's monkey see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. One of the big problems that I find when people want to containerize their apps is they just think, hey, we'll just split it up, dump it in the cloud, done. And as far as security goes, well, whatever we were doing on our traditional application stack, we can just keep doing that, no problem. And it'll all be fine. Anyone come across that attitude? Yes. Oh, good. Hands up. Some hands up. I like to get people to put hands up. I'm not publicly shaming people, I promise. So, good data protection practices. Now, this is one cool thing about me moving to Microsoft is that I get to use all the little bit raccoon stuff in my presentations, which I wasn't. Actually, they are open source, a lot of them, but yeah. So, in the words of Mary Poppins, and I know it's not Mary Poppins who actually originally said this, so someone pointed this out to me once after a talk. I do know, I just don't actually, I can't find out who it is. Well begun is half done. So when, this is something that is not new to anyone in security, but if you lift up an application and the application is rubbish, and you put it in the cloud, even if you containerize it, it's still rubbish, at least at the application level. As you can see, I'm trying to carefully pick my words to make this family friendly. I sound so British being like, it's rubbish. Oh, it's not very good. Like I said, I want to default to other words, but I'm trying to be good, so you don't bleep me. So if you're moving to the cloud, you should be, if you're a developer, you should be doing this. And if you're a security person, you should be encouraging your developers to do this. Actually tidy it up. Like, use TLS 1.2, or even better, use 1.3. Nothing should be being sent in the clear. If you've got some kind of weird, funky, deprecated protocols, then okay, you may have to set up some kind of tunnel, and I know that's horrible, but do it. Make sure everything's encrypted. Tidy up code. In other words, simplify the whole thing. Now, I know that you will get people saying, well, this isn't part of the scope of this work. We're just doing a migration. But I ask you, if you're not doing it now, when are you going to do it? Or are you just going to chuck it on the risk register for later? Okay, like, everyone knows that happens, but yeah. Okay, what I'm saying here isn't container specific, but this is, I think, still very, very relevant, because, it doesn't matter if you move something into the cloud, probably Google, Amazon, Microsoft, whoever, let's face it, we can probably do data centers a lot better than you can. But if your application is still rubbish on top, those layers of the stack are still rubbish, right? So, yeah. And talking about that brings us nicely onto the shared responsibility model. When you put things in cloud, you need to understand this. Has anyone heard any cloud provider, it doesn't matter which one, talk about shared responsibility model? A few people, possibly not enough. Well, everyone calls it the same thing as far as I'm aware, and this is understanding which bits of the cloud you are responsible for. Now, I stole this little graphic. As you can see, it's blatantly been cut from a different slide from one of my colleagues, but I think it's a pretty good description. So, SaaS, that's like a hotel room. Essentially, you just bring yourself along and check in. Nice, everything's done for you. It's tidied up every day. Did something just fall down? Yeah. I just saw that out of the corner of my eye. Platform as a service, it's more like a furnished apartment. So, you bring all your own stuff. Still largely done for you, but maybe the cleaning is done like once a day. Not once a day, sorry, once a week. And with IaaS, it's more like a rental apartment. So you get the room, but you need to sort everything else out in there. So you need to furnish it, you need to look after it, and you need to clean it. Private cloud is essentially like owning your own home. You buy it, and then you've got to build it. You've got to do the maintenance for the outside of the building, the inside, etc. It's all your responsibility. It's really important you understand this, because a lot of cloud problems come from not understanding where that responsibility lies. And I've had multiple discussions in my current role and previous roles about just, who does what, because often misunderstandings with that, things fall through the gaps. It happens a lot. Because we're moving away from that traditional security model, castles. This is a good castle. So I like castles. Has everyone used this analogy, like the traditional security model has a castle with big walls and a moat, etc.? Yes, we like it. That was a good picture of a castle. I should have put a Japanese one on, actually, seeing as I'm going to Japan soon. But anyway, it's also important to understand isolation and how we're moving away from this traditional security model. So instead of doing the big enforced perimeter, we're going towards zero trust. And this was, as we all know, Google Beyond Corp is probably the most famous implementation of this. But you should be doing this throughout your cloud. So we're doing defense in depth, which we've already had talked about. So I'm not going to explain defense in depth, because it's multiple layers of defense. But the idea is that even if someone breached some of your cloud, hopefully, there will be controls within your actual internal environment that will stop them moving laterally, or at least make it more difficult. So I wanted to do a quote about isolation. I'm pretty sure Jimmy Page wasn't talking about the cloud, but it was quite a good quote, because it said security. And isolation should make you feel very secure. You should be doing isolation on like a per endpoint, per instance, per whatever level. You can tell that, like, I've been so used to doing like small customer presentations. My default at the end of a section is to be like, does that make sense? Anyone have any questions? Like, we can wait to the end, but I've spent too long doing that recently. So, caring for your OS and your orchestrator. Now, I've been using Kubernetes and orchestrator kind of interchangeably in this talk so far. I acknowledge that. The reason for that is I do think that Kubernetes, in my personal non-employer opinion, is going to become the sort of de facto orchestrator. I know there are others out there. And I have different rants about those if you want to come and ask me afterwards. So I'm going to talk a lot about Kubernetes, but quite a bit of this can be applied to any old orchestrator. Is anybody not using, if anyone's using orchestrators or who has had experience with orchestrators, are you using anything apart from Kubernetes? Oh, okay. Any ranchers? Oh, a rancher person. Cool. But mostly Kubernetes, yeah. I thought so. I went to CrikeyCon in Seattle in December, and it's like 8,000 people. It's huge. It went up from something like 1,000 the year before. It's totally a thing. So anyway, if there's one thing you need to do when we're doing container security, this is what I tell everyone to do, which is make sure you know where your container images come from. Because we know there are so many repos on the internet. There's the official Docker one, and then there's loads of random stuff on GitHub and GitLab, and it doesn't matter what it is. Make sure that in an enterprise environment, you're pulling these container images and then you're storing them in an image repository. And when they're stored in the image repository, they've been scanned, they've been checked, you've had all your enterprise tools, whatever you use, put on them. And don't let devs just randomly pull from the internet. I know that's easier said than done, I know. But please try and make it easy for them to do it this way, because then you make sure your images are consistent. All the big cloud providers have image repositories, and there's plenty of open source and other third-party tools you can choose from. There's Claire, there's Notary. I think Notary just got bought by someone and has become something else, so can't remember now. But because, if you've got a compromised image, and this is the same with anything, it's game over already. It doesn't matter what controls we put on top, because, it's like sneak attack. I know. I just leave it there for a minute for... Someone told me, I did this talk in a meetup in Melbourne, and a lady told me that she didn't like this GIF because she found it upsetting, and then I felt really guilty. So my caveat is, I hope no one finds that upsetting. I just find it funny because I don't think the kid will have been badly hurt, but I think they just fell over, but if anyone doesn't like that, I'm sorry. So the fault in default, I wanted to put The Fault in Our Stars, which is a really weepy, teeny movie, but it didn't really seem to fit. Kubernetes default configs aren't really secure. Now, they are getting a lot better. They just released version 1.14 last week or the week before, I forget, very recently. And you really need to work through orchestrator configs to secure them. Some notable baddies, depending on the Kubernetes version you're using, is that the API server listens on port 8080. There's no kind of checking and authentication, and it'll just take pretty much anything you throw at it, which is kind of terrible. Secrets management in Kubernetes, secrets management, was stored in etcd and encoded in base 64. That was until about 3 versions ago, so excuse me, if you're not using the most recent version or 2 of Kubernetes, please make sure you're not using that default. CIS, the Center for Internet Security, have released a Kubernetes benchmark. It's free, it's really easy to use. Please work through that, please. And if you're not too up on Kubernetes, and it's only been around for since 2014. And like I said, I was at CrikeyCon in Seattle in December, and there were a load of the Google engineers there who've been involved in it since the word go, and even they're saying, we don't understand it all anymore. There's just way too much stuff going on. No one can possibly know everything about it. So, there's no shame if either yourselves or your engineers or your development teams don't really understand this yet, because it's reasonable. First time I ever did this talk was in Seattle, so I put Fraser in, even though I know Fraser wasn't actually filmed in Seattle, but I do love him, so. Yeah, and if you're a Zelda fan, it's a secret to everybody. I know, revealing my age. Don't bake creds and secrets into containers. Anyone seen this happen? It's almost as bad as just it's the modern day equivalent of just having config files with hard-coded creds in, right? Don't bake creds and secrets into containers. They should be passed in as variables. As I said, Kubernetes will store secrets in etcd encoded in base 64, unless you're on the last couple of most recent versions. I love this meme. It's one of my faves. Yeah. Everyone loves this. I mean, it's really old now, but I refuse. I mean, I think this one's nearly a year old, but I refuse to take it out of my presentation because it's like too good. Again, you should be using some kind of secrets management. Whatever cloud you're using, everyone provides their own secrets management. And there's third-party tools. I always recommend just using cloud-native tools if you can, usually just for ease of use. Now, I have seen a couple of use cases where the cloud inbuilt secrets management isn't suitable. And if that's the case, then you utilize third-party secrets management, but don't do it unless you have to, is my advice. And we don't talk about this enough. I almost give it its own slide because, like I said, we don't talk about this enough. Rotate keys regularly if you're in the cloud. I'm not going to tell you how regularly. That's an awful risk management type decision. It is, really. But if you've got really sensitive data, you should be rotating your keys regularly. And even if it's not so sensitive, you should probably be doing it at least every 6 months, once a year. Now, of course, I know that's a pain to do, and you should be automating it. I'm not saying do it manually, but we don't talk enough about how that should be being done. It's just common sense. Maybe that's why we overlook it. Anyway, moving on to my horror story number 1. Now, it's horrible. All my horror stories, I have 3. They are vague, and that's because I can't identify the companies involved. Plus, it is actually pre my current employer, and yeah, I'm just not allowed to do that. But they are real. I did see this happen. So a dev, he needed a slightly different image with different libraries, etc. He was just like, "Oh, screw it, I'll pull it from a public repository." So we know what happens next. Any guesses? Or if anyone's actually seen my talk online, possibly, you'll already know the answer. Yes! Bitcoin miner! I know. I like the GIF so much. Okay, so check your privilege. We're not talking about sort of white people, because that's what it seems to. But I just like the whole check your privilege, and it's actually cool because we talk about privilege so much. So check your privilege for containers. Like, don't run as root, don't run as root, don't run as root. Like, we know this, yeah. We've been going on about not running as root for a really long time. Now, I know there are a couple of scenarios where you do need to run as root, like genuinely. Like, if the container needs to modify the host system. But if that's the case, then you should be using runtime security tools to limit what's accessible. So there are lots of different things you can use, but some honorable mentions go to Aqua Enforcer, that one you have to pay for. SE Linux, which has been around a long time, but is an oldie but a goodie. AppArmor and SecComp profiles. Now, AppArmor is a little bit better because it actually is namespace aware as well. If you know stuff about Kubernetes, we also recommend you put things into different namespaces. SE Linux has got a rep for being really, really difficult to use, but if you haven't used it for the last 3 or 4 years, I would say go give it another go, because it's got a lot easier to use just by default. So yeah, give it a go. Couldn't think of any pictures to put up here, so Groot rhymes with root. So yeah, I know. Literally, my sense of humor is like top notch. This one's even worse, to be fair, because I just put Clippy on it, because Clippy deserves to be in more things, and I didn't have a better picture to put up. As I said before, I've kind of gone over this. It's a little bit of repetition of what I was saying before. Kubernetes has some terrible defaults, especially the older versions. So anonymous user access didn't used to be disabled. The dashboard had full admin privileges by default prior to version 1.7, and it had no RBAC before version 1.8. So if anyone is still using these really early versions, please make sure you fix this and just upgrade, actually. Now I'm just telling people to upgrade. But a really important point I want to make here is that if this sounds too onerous to go through because you still don't have the skills in Kubernetes because it's still really new, go and look at using a managed cluster. I don't care whose cluster you go and use. I don't care if it's Amazon or Microsoft or Google or whoever, but take that responsibility away. Like, you know, why not? There's no shame in doing that. I do think sometimes it can be like a point of pride for people to be like, nope, we're going to build our own. We need to do it. You know, we need to do it ourselves. But there's a lot of stuff to go through. You have a look at the Kubernetes sys benchmark, right? There is a lot of stuff to work through there. And if you don't have the resources and you don't have the time, seriously consider taking some of that responsibility away and letting someone else deal with it for you. There are also some interesting open source tools around that will do some scanning on your cluster as well. They seem to be more AWS focused than anything else, so you probably need to be using AWS, but yeah, give it a go. But don't be too proud to say, hey, don't be too proud to say, hey, do you know what, let's use a managed Kubernetes cluster, at least to begin with. It's easy, do it. Do it. So horror story number 2. This was a test environment. Kubernetes cluster spun up a test environment, and it was left with all its defaults, and it was left exposed to the internet for like half a day. Any guess what happened? Yes, I know. Bitcoin miner. I know, it's not the only thing that can happen, but it seems to be, it is the kind of easy attack du jour is Bitcoin mining. So luckily it was picked up relatively quickly, and so did not so much harm, but yeah. Last but not least in my tips and good practices is containing your enthusiasm for shifting left. So don't assume that your tool set, and this is what I was saying right at the beginning, don't assume your tool set is adequate for your needs when you're containerizing things. Usually your security tool set will minimum need extra agents adding or will need to be reconfigured, and it may be that you need to go from scratch and buy something new that's actually container aware. And when I talk about security tools, I'm talking things like your IDS, your vulnerability scanning, whatever kind of SIEM you use, if you have one. If you use runtime security, again, you may need to review that. And if you've got any auditing tools as well, because there's no guarantee that they will work. They probably minimum will need some tweaking. Same goes for your CI/CD pipeline. Now, if you're just moving to the cloud, it's likely you probably didn't have a CI/CD pipeline, so you're probably going from scratch anyway. But if you do happen to have one, then you'll probably need to alter your tools. And some tools might need to just go entirely, but you really need to do your research. I can't stress this enough. I don't care if you have a licensing agreement for the next 10 years with someone. I know some commercial people might care about that, but it's all well and good having a licensing agreement that goes for 10 years, but if the tool can't see anything, what's the point, right? Because what we want to do is benchmark tools. Seriously go and benchmark tools. I know that people just usually put in Google and go, okay, what works? Let's get these salespeople in to talk to us. But really go and benchmark things. Make sure you do a proof of concept. Make sure you actually look at them. And you should be doing this with your devs as well, because we've probably all seen security pick a tool. They're like, yeah, this tool is fine. We love it. But then devs are like, can't use it. Anyone seen that happen? Yes. Because we want devs and security to be like this. I know. I really like Pokemon. I'm 31, yeah. But it's so much more valuable when you actually do a joint thing, and whether we like it or not, we're all moving towards DevSecOps and DevOps. We're all working closely together, and there's way more overlap. So you really need to find something that's going to work for everyone. Otherwise, there's literally no point. Last but not least, horror story number 3, I saw an organization who, they were using old school vulnerability scanners. They actually weren't an old school product, they just needed tweaking and they hadn't done it. And they were like, our new environment is completely secure. There are no vulnerabilities in it. And I was like, yeah. So I was like, no. But I actually replaced this recently with this because I thought that was a better Trump fail. Trump in the McDonald's, in the federal shutdown, but yeah. Cool. Fail. I know he thought it was good, but whatever. Cool, and then last but not least, this was my experiment, which was getting myself pwned. So what I've been doing is spinning up containers, Kubernetes clusters, other things, and leaving them open to the internet for, well, now about 6 months. It was not on the cloud platform of my current employer, because I had to take someone who would use PayPal, so I could just put an amount down and not have to attach my credit card to it. So I tried to do basically the opposite of everything I've just encouraged you to do, because, wanted to see if I could get the hackers. I really love that. I can't believe it's taken me like a year of writing talks to find that. It's going to go in like every single talk I ever write from now on, I think. Anyway, yeah, I wasn't brave enough to do this on any infrastructure of my own, because no. And, you know, I wanted these things to be compromised. Anyone got some ideas about like what type of containers might be particularly vulnerable to getting owned if I spun them up and like just left them open to the internet? Sorry? Yeah, but like anything in particular that springs to mind as like particularly attractive, maybe. Oh, MongoDB, yes. Yes, obviously WordPress, yeah. So my favorite ones were Ubuntu 14.04 and WordPress. I did do some other things. I had a MongoDB and other things, but I was like, there is no way these can stay up on the internet for long without getting owned. No way. Unfortunately, like, okay, so apparently getting things owned when you're trying to do it is like harder than one would think. Now, I don't know if some people were like, this is blatant the honeypot, I'm not touching this. But I even left a WordPress container open that you could set it up. I did one with admin, and like, made it so easy, oh my God. Like, nobody owned any of my stuff, majorly. I got some weird scans, and that was about it. But this made me feel better. So Atticus, if you don't know Atticus, she is an amazing public speaker. She works for Assurance. She's based in Melbourne. If you ever get the chance to see her speak, I highly recommend going to see her. She's far better than me. And she tweeted that it took a month before the WordPress site she set up actually had a proper attack, which made me feel much better. Much better. Well, interestingly as well, just one comment, it's really fun to try and reverse engineer something on a cloud platform to actually make it vulnerable. Like, so I was going through the web stuff, like open everything, blah, 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 blah. And I think it's likely that there was, of course, some inbuilt platform protection that I don't have any control over that may have been protecting those containers as well. Who knows? But anyway, I just want to say it's actually quite fun to go and reverse engineer things. Quickly, I'll tell you, one of the funny things I did find, though, was I was using a tool it's either called PSAD or PSAD, I'm not sure how you say it, and basically it's kind of like a bit of an IDS type thing that runs on the IP tables in Linux. And it does lookups for the whatever's scanning you, and it shows you things. And one of the most interesting things I found about this whole thing was how apparently people use whois lookups for advertising. Like, we are not an ISP, and specially crafted and optimized for bandwidth-hungry applications. Well, there's like a hacker's dream. And take advantage of the best deal of bandwidth on the internet. And of course, my all-time favorite from China, security trouble. Like, I don't know. Like, that's genuinely what it came out as. Who knows? I know this is a very basic experiment, but it was good fun. And I don't know. Like I said, maybe someone was so smart that I can't even tell they've owned my stuff. I just wanted a Bitcoin miner, for God's sake. Like, I would have been happy. But in conclusion, so tidy up your application before you move to the cloud and containerize. And orchestrator defaults are terrible, so please change them. If you're not confident changing them, consider using something managed. And please, 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 make sure you know where your container images come from. Don't run as root unless you have very good reasons for doing so. Keep your secrets secret. Don't put them in etcd encoded in base 64, please God. And if you're shifting left, doing the DevOps thing, because let's face it, that's what management want everyone to do now, because it sounds good. Make sure you've got the right tools to support this. And apparently, this is literally like my last slide, and I really need to rearrange these slides. Purposely trying to get containers hacked is apparently harder than one would expect. Or maybe I'm just really bad at running experiments, I don't know. This is the good old useful links slide. We've got the sys Kubernetes security benchmark. There's the sys Docker security benchmark. NIST special publication 800-190 is the NIST containerization and container security summary. It's only about 10 pages long. Now, I know NIST documents can be a bit of a a bit of a mixed bag, but that one's really accessible, so I really recommend you go read it. Liz Rice from Aqua Security and Michael Hausenblast from Red Hat wrote a book late last year about Kubernetes security and how to secure it. It's pretty new, and you can get like a free PDF of it online. Of course, Microsoft have some security concepts for Kubernetes, but it's very general, and if you ignore the Azure bit at the end, it's basically applicable to everything. And that tool that I was using, which is pretty fun to have a play around with, PSAD or PSAD, it's open source. It's done by a chap called Michael Rash. That is me done. Thank you very much for having me. I don't know if I'm way under time, or I know I'm not over, but am I doing okay? I don't know.
You're about right.
I didn't have my timer going, so I can't see. But that's me done. So thanks very much for having me.
First of all, everybody give it up for Sarah Young. Yeah!
Thanks.
Now, as is my custom as the MC, I get to ask the first question because I just can. You talk about knowing where your container images are coming from, and I see things like Docker Hub and stuff, and I just think Android App Store. It's like a cesspit of guaranteed pre-owned crap, right?
It is indeed.
How do you even know where your stuff comes from? How do you know that a developer account hasn't been owned and the good image replaced with a bad one? Like the supply chain problem with pre-built containers is...
It's bad.
It's bad.
It is bad. And like Docker Hub even had some, I've probably heard this on Risky Biz. Probably did actually. Because the Docker Hub even had some dodgy images on it, but it was downloaded, I think it was something like 300,000 times before they got rid of it. So even the official repositories are bad. What you need to do really is pull something from the most legitimate source you can find, and then you should be running more checks over it before you actually chuck it into your image repository. So
you're not at the point where you're saying people should just build their own?
There is that as well. You could just build your own.
Yeah.
But I think the problem with building your own is that not everyone's got the time and the capability. But then again, I'm telling people to download an image and then add your own tools. So that's maybe that's about the same time investment.
Fast, easy, secure. Pick two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is how it goes. Alrighty, so let's throw it out to some questions. All right, well, I got more. Let's just keep going with that. Kubernetes, you mentioned one of those horror show Kubernetes bugs, and we did cover that one. And it really occurred to us when we were discussing that Kubernetes hasn't, like a bug like that one shouldn't show up in anything that's had any sort of meaningful attention. So even though it was just one bug, it was of the nature that made you sort of clench. It was just a bit, what's your sort of feeling for what we're going to see in Kubernetes in the future? Because I have a feeling that's not going to be the only horror show bug.
It won't be. And I think because it's still new, it's still changing, but they were saying, again, I keep going, when I was in Seattle, but they were saying, the engineers were saying Kubernetes is starting to become boring, which is a good thing because that means it's changing less and it's sort of starting to stabilize out, but it's not 100% there. And I think because it's still quite new, I know now we've had the worst security bug Kubernetes has ever had.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit hysterical, but it was
It was
bad. It was bad. I'm not saying it wasn't bad. Please don't ever quote me saying that a 9.8 CVE or whatever is not that bad or hysterical, because clearly it was. But
especially when it's the shit that runs all your other shit,
Yeah, I know. And the fact that it was undetectable is not great.
No.
But I'd say, it's not a great bug, I have to say. I think we'll probably get a couple more of those.
Yeah.
Just someone will find something terrible and it'll all be a bit hysterical. And then I think it'll start to calm down a bit, and it'll be more kind of, rather than, oh my God, like you said, clenching, it'll be more maybe just eye rolling like we do with Cisco.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know. I'm not sucking off any of the vendors.
The recent buffer string copy buffer overflow in a password field was a favourite for 2019. That was a Cisco one. Thank you very much for that, Cisco. Bitcoin miners, great low impact way to learn a lesson, I think. That's pretty much your best case scenario if you're going to get on.
It is. Right? You know what though? I think, because they're easy to do, right? And they're easy to kind of shove in an image on the quiet or just load up if you've got some kind of dodgy, or easy to own container.
It's a shame when your Amazon Web Service billing statement is performing as your IDS, which is... that should not be how you find out, but you're right. It's a low-impact, minimal kind of way to learn a lesson. Yeah.
So in that sense, I guess we have to be thankful for Bitcoin Miner, Because if the worst thing that happens is you get a big bill, I think you just got off a hut pretty lightly.
Now, you're talking before about security software that developers hate. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that you're talking about things like PAM modules for Linux, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've just heard they're universally awful.
There you go. Look, this is supporter.
Awesome.
We love
Here
it.
we go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It can vary a lot though with the different tools. Like security will be like, we love this, it's great. And like, have you seen like some of the ones? I've forgotten the name. I've forgotten the acronym now. For the ones that literally start giving feedback as developers code. Oh, I've totally forgotten the acronym, but it literally gives feedback as they type. And I've been told this is highly irritating.
Is it like Clippy, but for developers?
Yeah.
Hello, it looks like you're trying to write a cross-site scripting vulnerable piece of code.
Oh my god, that would be actually really fun. I'll put a product suggestion in for that, because that'd be fun.
The future is horrible. Everyone give it up again for Sarah Young.
Thank you.